Yes.
You know, in some countries they put black tea in the red wine to make it better.
Hey, Maxine, the guests can see the conversation room that you're having right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So no. Okay.
All right, I think we're going to get ahead and get started here. I just want to let you guys know that this is Luke, who's sitting beside me. This is the first time that we've had somebody on here other than me. I want to thank all the guests that are here today, and something a little bit different rather than just hearing me talk all day. So we prepared, Lucas helped me prepare a little presentation about what he's been up to and where he's been. And so we're going to let him do most of the talking. I'll just do a little bit of an introduction to launch it. This is a photo that was taken last year of 4 of our 5 children and 2 of the dogs. So that's Luke when he was living at home, and obviously he's been in seclusion. He's been SIP in place, and yeah, I need a haircut as well, but that's where we're at. So just a little bit about who he was. He graduated from Fresno State in 2017. He'd worked in some vineyard management companies around the local area. He'd also worked with me on and off, of course. And then we're going to go through his experiences of these 6/7. He threw in a quick New Zealand visit there, vintages in the last 3 years. And we didn't expect him to be back at this point because he was supposed to still be in Argentina. But we all know what happened. So Luke, I look back, and one of the first winemaking photos that I could find of you was, we think it's 2007. Do you remember this photo, and do you remember participating and why?
Yeah, it was definitely before I was at university. We'd just gone out to, I think it was Crazy Creek at the time. We went to where it was Catherine's vineyard, and we had picked a macro bin with one of my friends, Taylor, and yeah, we just threw it in the shed, let it ferment in a bin for a week. I remember going and doing punch downs with Royce every day, and then I mean, it was quite a bit of a mission using people's at-home winemaking kits, but I do remember that was the first wine I really made, I guess.
And how do you think, and now look at the photo, that this photo was taken of you, what, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago?
No, I mean, that'll be France. That's in Louis Latour, 2018. I mean, it's pretty similar. It's the hair that's different, I think. I didn't know what I was doing with the hair in high school, I was shaving it. I was growing it out. It was a mess. At least like now well, maybe I still have a mess. I don't know.
So you think your passion, where's your passion, has your passion evolved? Have you become more interested or just more specific, or how do you think your time has changed from then and now?
I think as I've gone and I've learned, I learn a little bit more at each place I go and learn something a little bit different. It kind of just changes my focus, Now I've gone to learn a specific thing. I've had something on my mind. Boom, I've gone. I've experienced it. Maybe I learned it or not, or maybe I learned something similar to it. But whatever it is that I've experienced, it's now it's altered what I'm going to do at the next place. I've learned a little bit, so now the next place is going to be different than what it was going to be. It was funny. I actually realized that in every time I go to a new country and have to go live somewhere, you get a little bit of anxiety. Usually, I mean, I have to find new friends. I have to work a new job. I have to find new accommodation. I have to do all this stuff twice a year. It's a lot. But I found that actually when I went to Argentina, which was the last of those 6, I was totally fine. I showed up and I didn't, I developed over a lot of time, like doing this. I got really used to it really quickly. I've found a way to make a home very quickly.
That's cool. Well, this is one of the first vineyard shots that we could find. This was around 2007 as well, though maybe a little bit earlier. We were arguing about how old Hillary was.
Yeah, I got braces in there.
Same dog. The dog looks younger. All right, so, and then this is a more recent vintage. This was 2019 that we took. So each child's grown up a little bit. So, Luke, why don't you lead us off? So the first vintage that you completed was 2017, and you, where were you?
So I would have, finished university and decided the first, I mean, because of the way the year works, I thought I'd just stay in California to do a harvest before I went somewhere else to try and do that. So I ended up getting a job at Opus One with Michael Salachi, who's the winemaker there. And I remember, I mean, I was very naive at the time. I didn't really even know which winery, Opus was. And when I saw this photo, I saw a photo of the winery. I was like, of course I know which winery it is. It's the coolest looking winery in Napa. You drive through and it's just gorgeous. Opus as a start, as the first one was interesting because it's so meticulous. Everything is like perfect. They clean everything. I actually remember I want to say if it wasn't my first day, it was my first week. I had just put a clamp on the ground and someone like immediately like pointed at it and was like, you can't put that on the ground. And I was just like, I remember thinking like, come on, man, like focus up. You're in a very nice winery now. You really need to you need to remember your stuff. And at the same time, most wineries are totally happy with, it's just a clamp on the ground, it's okay. So Opus was very like to the T. You can see this is actually a photo of the of their cellar, and everything's clean. Even off vintage, they're cleaning the outside of the tanks. They're cleaning the inside of every groove. It is crazy. They obviously have the money and the ability to do this. So I think that they should. So I think another one that stood out like that was I remember one day, I mean, obviously they have tours that go through the winery and stuff, and we're setting up just tapes to block off the tourists so that they walk in a single area. And I'm told to wipe down these poles that are not doing anything for wine at all. They're just there. And I realized that it's for aesthetics. And I remember thinking like, it's just aesthetics. It's wine, come on, make it more, personable. But I realized later on that aesthetics, pull a lot of weight.
Well, the big thing in 17, of course, was the fire. So you want to tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah. So the fire started in October. So I think we had picked 90% already from the Tokelon vineyards, which are this one on the left, which is immediately outside. So these two photos are taken from the same spot, really. You can see the parking lot and you can see that set of trees right in the middle. I remember the first day of the fires, I woke up, my room smelled like a camp, and I didn't really know what was going on because it was so early. I had work at, I think, 6 a.m. So I was up at 5, and I just started driving to work at 5:30, and I was driving on the 29, that highway in Napa, and I remember going down and at this point I knew there was a fire, but I didn't know much about it. And I just saw both sides of the road, the Vacas and the Mayacamas, the hill ranges on both sides, both were in fire. And it's 5:30 in the morning and no one's on the road. And just, there's so much fire. And I just had no idea what was going on. And I'm going to work. I got to work and then realized no one else showed up.
And what's this photo on the left?
Sleeping in my car at Opus. Sometimes it called for that. It's in a pretty, when you get into Oakville, there's the only town around is Napa, and that's like maybe a 30-minute drive or so, 20 minutes maybe. So sometimes, you just sleep in the car. The other thing about Opus is that they know how to throw a party. They're very, it's Napa, so it's very, very posh compared to here in Sonoma County. And Opus, beyond that is kind of the epitome of that. They make some really incredible wine, and some of their buyers spend, serious amounts of money on their wine. So this is a photo of a party that they put on every 4 years for some of their top spenders. But it's, it's really fun to get to go and totally dress up and at an event like this, I'm working, so I don't necessarily have to deal with the customers or the buyers, but I get to go spend a little bit of the free time with the other coworkers. I was really lucky.
Why don't you let us in on a little secret? I know you did some vertical tastings. You want to name a couple of Opus vintages that stood out in your mind?
Yeah, I think, you know, they gave me a vertical tasting in like the first 2 weeks, so I wasn't real ready for it. I didn't know what I was going to taste, but I do remember 2003 was something that I really liked. We had a vertical from 02 to, I want to say 17, like right to when I was current there, 02 to 17. And then they threw in the 1980. I remember that one too. 1980 was a good one.
And 03 was not a spectacular year by California standards. So interesting that they also had a good wine in 03, because I think 03 was a great year.
Yeah, well, it definitely made a unique wine, something for aging. It was, I mean, tasting it next to 02 and 04, you know, you have something that is obviously something a bit different, a little bit out of the ordinary, which is awesome.
So the only wine that we could do it in comparison was we discussed which wine we would drink today, and so we decided to focus on Forefathers because that's our only multi-country brand. This is a brand that we created back in 1998, and so Forefathers, that's what we're drinking today, Forefathers Cab. This is the 2017 actually we're drinking, not the 16. I've got the 16 label up, but it just got 94 points as well. But yeah, real small, berry, etc. So we're going to drink a couple of Forefathers wines as we go along here today.
Yeah.
This is a picture of that vineyard. This is fog, not smoke, and you can see, because Forefathers we have dry berry, it's dry farm, so you get to see the berry size. This is a typical Cabernet berry, and this is a dry farmed Cabernet, and that's what we're drinking as in Forefathers. All right, so the next vintage you drank, went to, Luke was Errazuriz, which is a winery that I've been working at for almost 30 years on and off. So why don't you tell us what happened there? And
yeah,
this is the Acongugua. This is Santiago. This is the Acongugua. The Acongugua includes Casablanca and Acongugua North. So it's quite an interesting shaped appellation, sort of a U, heads out towards the coast.
Yeah, so it's that green one, that green valley up the top. I mean, most wine I think comes from
Maipo.
From Maipo. Yeah, of course, Maipo, which is a big region closer to Santiago. Chile was, you know, before I was getting ready for it, it was kind of, I don't know, maybe I didn't even get ready for it. I just kind of got thrown into it. It was, I think it was a good first experience because I had no expectation. So I kind of got thrown into it. It was really difficult, but you know, I didn't have anything that I really had to think about beforehand. So I remember arriving, and on the same day, I went to the winery after, you know, getting in Santiago, driving there, getting there same day, and immediately starting work the next day. And we did 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for weeks, and it was very physical, extremely physical. I lost a lot of weight. So, so this is the winery actually. On the left you have the old construction, 1870. It's a very old winery. In fact, there's even older skeletons of a winery in some of the fields nearby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I showed some photos of you earlier. And then on the right is the newer facility, and both of these you can actually see them kind of from this vantage point. Both of these photos are taken from the same spot, so you can see that they're trying to modernize a little bit. This one on the right is mostly it's all gravity flow, so the grapes are fed in through the top, and there's 3 levels: tank heads, tanks, and then at the very bottom there's barrels. So it gravity flows all the way to the bottom. Honestly, it's a really beautiful winery. Sometimes I find that with construction you can make function. So really beautiful winery. And some others are as well, but they're not necessarily easy to work in because they're made for their aesthetic and not for their function. Chile's really big for this. All right, this is head trained Carmenere on the hill next to a cactus. So Chile is all desert. It was really, really hot some days and really cold some days. So it definitely changed while I'm there in autumn. I can remember some days it being, so killer hot and we have to wear pants and a long sleeve. And then I remember some days I was pumping over this is a real bad one, but I remember pumping over a 40-degree tank and the steam coming off because it was so cold. It was so cold in the morning that there was steam coming off the wine that was coming out. So definitely not good, but.
And you did a lot of tastings as well. I can see that.
Yeah. So this is what made it really tough. I had a great team, and we lived immediately on the other. We basically lived at the winery. We lived at the winery. So this is some of the team as well. So there's 8 people living in the house, and 4 of us would be at the winery all the time. So we just go and switch shifts. We all had the same jobs basically, and so 4 people would always be at home. We would. This photo's funny. You'd get home and we'd hacer un asado, like make a barbecue, which is what you do in South America. And here we're real poor. We had very little food, not much at all. There's one market in this town, which is, I don't even know if I call it a town really. And we barbecued over this trash can. But so we even made pizzas in the trash can. But it's basically a trash can. Every day you'd have to fan it to try and get the fire to light to cook your meal. And so it was always an effort. We were very sleep deprived. I remember, some of the winemakers, some of those top winemakers. You have my boss was Jose, but just above him, he's basement manager, and then there's Pedro, Vladimir, and Francisco, and they're kind of the main winemaking team. But every now and then, they would ask one of the 8 of us, or 2 of the 8 of us, they'd be like, do you want to come see the vineyard? And so we're all studying. And we've just worked 12 hours, but we'll say yes, but we're not going to get paid for these 5 hours that we know that we're going to go on this excursion. But you never say no if you got to go see the vineyard. So you've worked your 12-hour shift. You go and do 5 hours of free labor. It's not labor. You just go to the vineyard, but then you get home and you only sleep for 2 hours before you have to go to your next shift. So it is quite difficult.
But this was the first winery that you worked with that had multiple 100-point scoring wines. So, I mean, Chadwick scored 100 points twice, Senya scored 100 points twice. So, yeah. I mean, the quality, the sheer quality that you would have been witnessing in the number one, in my mind, the number one winery in Chile, of course.
Yeah. Honestly, this winery is hard to argue because it does all of it. It does everything, and it does it really well. It actually. I mean, with the 8 of us in that house, I thought it functioned super well, and we worked really hard. It was good work, and sometimes things like this happen. You see this photo of, I remember this happened in the middle of the night. It was just a tank that was a little bit overfilled, and we dealt with it. But I think this is the only one that overflowed that year. It was pretty good, but it was just like, it was so much. Here's the work, and we know that you know enough to get it done. I got there and I didn't speak that much Spanish at the time. So Chilean Spanish is quite difficult. And that's where I ended up learning most of my Spanish, which is not ideal. But it was interesting. I remember I was given a team and I have to get everything done. So I have to speak in Spanish to give directions to my team. But, over time, you kind of figure it out. It is.
And then we had a bit of a gap before you had to get over to France. You had to shoot over to New Zealand to get a passport, a visa, because it was too hard to use a US passport. So you shot to New Zealand. So you did so Luke was down here in Marlborough. He had to go to, I think you had to go to Wellington to get your passport.
Yeah. It's good.
So he was in Wellington to get his visa, but he shot over to Marlborough, and Royce had been working the vintage there. So he shot down. So he was in the Wairal Valley, which is where we make our own wine. Forefathers Sauvignon Blanc, again, of course, is made there. And this is the wine. This one just got a 91 points for the 2019 as well. These are the wax eyes that we named the wine after. I don't know if you saw any wax eyes, Luke, but these things are notorious. They just eat nothing but grapes, and they feed for 30 miles. Of course, everything was machine harvested, but you had arrived sort of right at the end of the vintage. And this is a view that you took from the winery that you're working at, Coterie, with Ben Glover, my friend.
Yeah, New Zealand was funny and quick. I was lucky because Royce was working there. My younger brother, he was working at this winery before I was, and I had to just go get the visa. So I showed up the day he left. He picked me up from the airport, And I'm pretty sure I dropped him off at the airport later that day. And so I took his house, I took his car, I took his job.
You take his girlfriend too?
Yeah, it's a bummer he didn't have one. But
and it was raining. I can see it was classic Marlborough.
Yeah.
As soon as the vintage is over, it starts to rain. So you're doing a dance on a truck there? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, we were loading. So all this was finished wine. This was off season. So I was mostly just doing fining of white wines, which is something I hadn't done before, which is really cool. But yeah, this was the first day I was required to work outside, and it was pouring rain, just tons of rain, and we were filling these trucks, and it's basically just me in the cellar. I think I think there's like one other person that was like half in the cellar, but I was literally the only cellar worker at the time. So yeah, just out in the rain, trying to run a pump, trying to climb on top of the tank. It was yeah, a bit of a mess, but you know, after I filled about 4 of them, I figured it out.
Even though you had a New Zealand passport, were you welcome with your funny accent?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people, you know, I definitely get that, but a lot of people give me the honorary Kiwi, you know, pass. But it's funny in most countries. I usually just say I'm from New Zealand rather than the US. You get by a lot easier.
All right, we'll keep that between us. We don't want the rest of the audience to know that.
Yeah.
So this was a photo at our vineyard that you took. The sheep were running everywhere. I'm glad to see that. So
yeah.
All right. And then the big one, you went on to France. What happened there? Where were you living?
Yeah, so I remember, I guess when I got there, I remember, so France was a long way to get there. Flew to Paris. I had to take a train to Beaune. I arrived at Beaune, I remember 10 p.m., like after 10 p.m., maybe it was 10:30, and I'm real frustrated and tired, and I'm walking into the city of Beaune, and I'm real frustrated carrying my bags, but it was just so gorgeous. You know, it's real French countryside. I mean, if anyone likes wine and they ever go to France, you go to Beaune. Like, it is incredible. It really is just beautiful. But I did walk to a hotel, and they let me in. Right, they were closed at 11 o'clock, and I walked in at like 10:58. I remember getting there. But I lived in Aloxe, Corton, which is,
I got the pointer on it now.
Yeah, a little appellation just north of Beaune. Yeah, and so in this photo you can, oh yeah, that's where I was. So you can see where the city of Beaune is. It was a little bit of a distance. It's just a bike ride. It took me 10 minutes getting there because there's always wind going south. If you go back to that photo,
yeah.
So this big green patch, the big green patch in the top of it, yeah, it's called the Bois de Corton, and so this is a really famous piece of earth, and so the vineyards wrap around it, around the south end of it, and this is the only south-facing Grand Cru in Burgundy, and it's Corton Charlemagne, and so I lived just outside of it, and I spent most of my time inside that vineyard. Actually, probably more time in the vineyard than I did in the winery for this one. But it was a really incredible place to live. Yeah, riding into town, seeing Beaune, real. I don't know. It was good. I lived right across from a church, which struck the bell every single hour and half hour. So it was even all through the night. Even at 12 o'clock midnight, it would strike 24 times.
No way.
Really, really difficult in some regards.
Wow.
France was definitely a the old world. It was much more old world. Yeah, so Corton Charlemagne. You can actually even see where the winery is here on this map. So if you see where the arrow is pointing, if you just go to the right, and then a little bit up, and you see a little gray patch. The gray patch, yeah, that right there. That's actually the winery. And so they bring the grapes basically from all around the Clos de Roy and Corton. All of these vineyards, all these appellations are Corton. It's really interesting the way they do it there. I think, yeah. So. the way that
I can't believe that this was the winery though. You said that little shed there on the hill. I've seen it before. I've never been there myself, but I mean, I've seen it, but I've never been inside it. And then this photo to the right, Luke, is actually what's inside that building. It's hard to believe that small building can handle
Yeah. So that building, so the winery's founded in 1796. It's 20 years younger than the U.S. And so this is the winery. It's very small, and on the inside, those tanks are no bigger than 8 tons. Most of them are 5, or no, maybe the biggest is 5 and the smallest is 3. Regardless, they're all just Pinot, open top, oak tanks. You know, you walk on this catwalk above here, and it's got these railroad tracks on it, because we would push basically a coal cart, a big cart that would have grapes in it, and it has a big plug. And we pull the plug out, and the grapes would just drop into the tanks here. It was really old fashioned, but they have their structure kind of down to a T. So of this photo where you can see the winery, you can see the soil on the left. You can see up that row is full of rocks. It's full of limestone. All of Burgundy is just real heavy limestone. In fact, some of it is bedrock after, half a foot. It's like 8 inches, and then it's bedrock in some places. But for hundreds of years, they've had these appellations blocked off, kind of like rocked out. Actually, if you go back one photo, you see this one on the bottom left is Montrachet. And so this is one of the most famous vineyards, but almost all the vineyards will have this concrete box around it. And it probably holds the soil together a little bit, I think, keeps it terraced. But, they've been making wine off of some of these blocks for, a couple hundred years. So they really understand the terroir. This is kind of like where terroir makes sense. They know the difference between their 50 meters, so they have to section them off. And I reckon Burgundy's got some of the most expensive land in the world, honestly. Cultivation.
Yeah. But the food, but your culture, you were there during the, you didn't witness it yourself, but you were there during the Yellow Jacket protests.
Yeah.
So how would you feel the cult? I mean, you went from Chile, 100-point wines, kind of an old world, new world situation, to a winery that's just vested in the old world. I mean, the culture shift must have been incredible. Yeah. Language obviously was a big difference, but the food as well. You had a little bit more food here and Beaune than you did in.
Yeah, the way you say that, the culture shift was massive. It's huge. I mean, it's country folk there. I got, and this is a famous winery. This is a really incredible winery that is well renowned. And I showed up, and there's people like just without shoes on. They're all just muddy. They're all just like unbathed. Like, it was just real rugged. It felt like I was in the countryside. I loved it. No one spoke English. I think there was one other person from the US, but I didn't work with them really. So the language barrier was quite tough, but, and I had a lot of stigma about, French people and France and stuff. I'd met a lot of French people traveling around and stuff. Good people, but they understood like a reputation of sorts. But, I got there, and they were just like all incredible people, all like really down to help me out. And none of them spoke a lick of English. I didn't speak a lick of French. So it was interesting. I like this photo on the right the most because there was one guy in the winery. I don't know what his job was. He lived at the winery, but he would pour everyone wine before lunch break or at the end of the day. So every single day, this guy walks around, and when I see him walking around, I'm like, I know what's going to happen. He's going to pour me a glass of wine. And we're going to
Pavlov's dog, man. You're a Pavlov's dog.
It was crazy. And at lunch, you just drink as much as you want. Like, they give you
really?
Like, the food was incredible. I mean, France, like, hands down, took the food. I mean, best cheese in the world. Like, there was no competition. I mean, I would have, one of my meal courses was always cheese, sort of thing. Like, oh, it was incredible. I think if I spoke French, this would have been my favorite vintage, but rather tough. I love snails. I got a photo of snails on there. It was really good.
So we had a couple of questions. What would you say is the most important takeaway from your time in and around Côte d'Or, and or what did you learn from the French that your old man didn't teach you? Good, we'll move on.
Yeah, like I said, it was a lot different than I expected before I got there, and I think the big thing was like well, a lot of that terroir and understanding, you know, how long they've been making wine on some of this land. You know, they really know the land. I didn't really, you know, I can understand the tradition. The tradition is so, it's honestly inseparable there. You know, here you build culture in a company like over a few years, but there it's, you know, it's been in the culture for hundreds of years. And it's so deeply ingrained.
And there was, what about this, because, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about organics, biodynamics, natural wine among the millennials. Did you witness more of that in France than anywhere else?
You know, I wasn't so exposed to the markets when I was in some of these places. I was kind of focused a little bit more on myself, but you know, the natural wine is a big change that's happening these days. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Maybe people don't understand it, but you know, to me, it seems a lot like organics. People are getting a little, maybe not more educated, but they are getting more educated. They want to know a little bit more about, or what they want to know, that nothing unusual is going on with their wine. When they say natural wines, they just want to know, I think, in my opinion, I think they just want to know that it's happened naturally. You know, it's not people throwing a ton of citric, a ton of tannic, a ton of sugar like into these ferments to like make the wine or whatever. And in general, you know, most wineries, you know, adhere to this. I found, you know, none of these wineries ever used any mega purple or anything like that. You know, they all got most of theirs. I mean, these are really nice places. They wouldn't.
You worked at 6 of the best wineries in the world. I mean,
they didn't.
Sort of different.
Some of them didn't even use DAP, and DAP is ammonium phosphate, which is often added to ferments for the yeast nutrition, and it's kind of like an energy drink for the yeast. But you know, even things like this, people that are in the market buying a natural wine, they don't know what that is. I think when you find the bridge between the two, you'll be able to have a visit to a winery without anyone trying to hide anything before they come in. You know, like every winery I've gone to, they all do visits and they all want you to hide additions before they come in. And it's because people don't understand what they are. So I don't know.
And so you stayed here a little bit longer. That's Corton Charlemagne, that you stayed on pruning. And you told me a funny story about what happens at the end of the day. They all sort of knock off, even if they haven't finished a row or whatever.
Yeah. So the top of this row underneath that rainbow is that Clos de Bois, or the Clos de, the Bois de Corton. Yeah. But I got to work in that vineyard quite a lot. So the pruning was tough. You know, we'd get up real early in the morning and it was freezing cold almost always. So there was one day where it was snowing on the right there, but a lot of the days you'd walk in and it looks like the bottom left and you can't even see very far because the fog's so thick. But the pruning was excellent. I think I spent more time pruning than I spent in the winery, to be honest, but you know, that's what it was. You know, in France, they made the wine in the vineyard. They really made it in the vineyard. They're really meticulous about how the vineyard was dealt with. You know, these are really expensive grapes, really, like, I don't know, probably some of the more expensive grapes that I've ever dealt with.
Sure.
Really.
All right, and then you went, you didn't have a language problem here. You went to the Barossa. I threw this map up. Obviously, I went to university in the Barossa. Just real quick, this is the state of Victoria. I've always loved this area here, the Rutherglen area. Deep muskets and tokais, and I used to live in Wagga Wagga, which is somewhere up here. Mudgee, Hunter, sorry, I'm down in here. What am I talking about? Here is where Wagga is. Capital of Australia, Canberra. But we're talking about South Australia here, where we made Forefathers Shiraz from down here in McLaren Vale for a number of years. But Luke was working up here in the Barossa Valley. And the Barossa Valley, you know, there's Eden Valley, Clare Valley, etc. And I just threw this up. This was an interesting map of the soils. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew the soils were fairly consistent, but much more consistent than what I realized. This is the wine that we were making. This is the old label, and we called it the Gravel Pit Vineyard. And this was an example of the soil that we had. If I look at the best soils around the world, I would throw in parts of Marlborough, Maipo in Chile, and this vineyard was taken in McLaren Vale. This photo was taken in McLaren Vale. So fairly similar. You can see the roots coming through the rock. This to me is ideal. So take it away. You're in Penfolds, where they make a little bit of Grange, I hear.
Yeah, Penfolds was something else. It was nice to be in a country kind of as a break in between tougher vintages, having Australia to go to. You know, I could speak the language. I was staying with basically an uncle of mine there, and I was also living with someone else from California. So it was really a much more comfortable transition. And Penfolds was a different beast. It was huge, massive. I mean, this photo is just the outside section. You know, all the inside is where the fermentations occur. They are, and then the photo on the right, you see their porter tanks or potter tanks. Australia's super big on safety. I think one of the craziest things I heard, they said no one's died in a winery since like 2007 or 2008, I think, in Australia. And this is because of safety rules. I mean, in California, someone dies every year from something. And, you know, France, I heard lots of stories about people getting struck by lightning. It's real old school. But here in Australia, they really, really prevent this stuff. To the point that it's actually quite redundant in a lot of the things that I have to do for the safety. But these potter tanks, you never have to get inside of. They basically have a punch in the bottom of them, the same way a wine bottle does. And it has a big sweeping arm that kind of turns around that, and it'll just toss all the skins out. So you never have to get inside. And Australia had lots of different practices, things that I would have studied in school, but never have I ever seen a winery that actually did these things. So one of them are rotary tanks, these big silver tanks that are basically on their side. And instead of doing pump overs, they mechanically turn. The problem with them is that they can be pretty anti-oxygen. They don't get a lot of aeration in them. So we would sparge them. We would have oxygen constantly running through them to give them a little bit of oxidation through fermentation. But they actually made some of their better Cabernets out of this. And then this is the one on the left is what's really popular in Australia. And this is called a submerged cap. So you have a fermentation where the grape skins rise to the top, and here they've pushed them down and put boards over them so that all of the skins are submerged underneath the wine that you can see on the top there, and they're being held down by those boards there. And so this is really common in Australia, and what it is just really strong extraction, like really gonna pull more out. But it seemed to work for them, and honestly, the Shiraz are amazing. They use a lot of American oak in Australia rather than the common places. Most places, or a lot of places, use French oak, but a lot of American oak here was excellent touch. Definitely a style. Barossa Shiraz is a style. It's real big. It's real, open. It's kind of like drinking Napa Cab in a way, but extracted, real rich. It's good. I think it's really good, chocolatey. They also had, the biggest barrel cellar in the Southern Hemisphere was this winery. So it was insane. You just walk through it for 10 minutes and just go to another room full of barrels.
Then what about so you were telling me about the piece of just one little tidbit of culture in each country, but the one that struck me was you get off night shift and you go straight to the pub, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, so that was the gold. So there was one hotel, and it was a couple blocks away from the winery. Like, I would beat people there on my bike while they're all driving. It was so close. But at 7 in the morning, they will open up for $5. It's five Aussie dollars for a breakfast burger and a beer. So we would all go there at 7 in the morning after a 12-hour shift, get a nice egg burger, and
it wasn't a meat pie.
And a pint. No.
So and the day shift guys would meet you there, or just night shift guys?
Yeah, that was just a night shift thing, and it was a bummer because you'd be on day shift and you couldn't go do it. But like after night shift, that's where you are. But it's only on, I think it was only on Thursdays and Fridays was the only day. It wasn't every day of the week, unfortunately.
Good. I'm glad that at least there was some more safety protocols going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't have made it to work very much.
So Spain was next. You're in the Rioja, and you're in the wineries in Logroño. So I used to work at this winery that Luke went to. So this was part of Aloxe, for those that remember the Aloxe days. And the winery is called Campo Viejo. And when it was originally in the town of Logroño, and Logroño paid the Allied Domecq or the Wine Alliance at the time multiple $1 million and they moved them onto a hill so they could expand the town. And by the way, that's the Rioja, of course. It's always much further north than I remember. So they bought them a hill, and then they cut the hill and built the winery in the hill. So the interesting thing about it was that when you drove a truck up on top, all you saw was 2 little slits where you could drop the grapes in, but underneath that hill was massive winery. And so actually I'm just going to jump a photo here. So this is all you can see of this winery, and yet underground here is just massive. So Luke, what'd you do there?
Yeah, it was basically built into the side. Logroño is a cool town. Kind of like, feels like Hillsburg in a way a little bit. But yeah, small town. I got to work in the experimental section. So the winery itself is huge, massive. It's about the same as Penfolds, to be honest, very similar in size. But I was put in the experimental section. So I had nothing bigger than these tanks that you can see on the left. Actually, these are the largest tanks that I dealt with. And the smallest ones are on my right. And here on the right, you know, it's so small that I'm aerating the tank by taking wine out, putting it in a bucket and tipping it back in the top. It was very, you know, it's so small that, you know, if I throw any oxygen in there, I'm going to overflow the tank. So it was interesting. I got to do different things, a little bit of orange wine, lots of new varietals. I mean, Tempranillo's God in La Rioja, and it's really incredible. They also use a lot of American oak compared to the French oak. They use a lot of American oak in Spain as well. The other one that I liked a lot was the grapes in these bins. They're white grapes. They're called Viura. They're also known as Macabeo, but they use this in Spain. They use this. This is, at least in La Rioja, this is their main white grape, and they can make cava, which is the sparkling wine out of it. But with Viura, you can make still whites. You can make orange white wine, as well as doing things with barrels. Like you can barrel age this stuff, and it really changes the profile of it. It's a really versatile grape. It's something that like struck me as, you know, something new. I think that's something I found in all the countries, something that was, you know, unexpected, something that I didn't think about before I got there, and then just blew me away. Kind of like finding Grenache in the Barossa. You know, Grenache and Barossa was something I never thought of, but it's ace. It's real good. But here in Spain, it was rather different. Again, I think this is the largest barrel cellar in the Northern Hemisphere, was this winery, which is big.
It certainly is. I've never seen a barrel cellar this big. It is massive. Yeah. And the other cool thing I remember about the winery is this was the first time that I'd ever seen each tank had its own pump. And this is part of that winery. It sort of looks like the Errazuriz Don Max area, sort of the same, but a little bit wider catwalks perhaps.
Yeah,
but,
there's narrow catwalks. Yeah. It is set up a lot of the same. A lot of them are set up similarly. You know, you have your own pumps on all of Opus's stuff, and here you get it as well. But and here they also have the Potte tanks. They also have the sweeping arm tanks. So it's a little bit of a combo. They comboed up a little bit of Australia, a little bit of other places. The other thing that they did here that was different was they blasted carbon dioxide into the fermentations to break the caps. Instead of just pump overs, they would pump gas into them to break the cap. And that's another thing I would have studied in school, but I never seen in practice.
Yeah, pulsar. We did a lot of pulsar at Buena Vista, and back especially on Pinot. So so this is where you were living, Luke?
Yeah. I lived in the basement of a family, which was actually kind of nice to like hear a family living above me. But yeah, I lived in the basement, just entered through the garage and had a small kitchen and stuff. And this, I mean, outside of work, this is where I spent my time really, or walking outside. These photos on the left are taken very close to my house. So almost well at the base of these hills is where Campo Viejo is, but it sits basically at the base of the hills. But I really like that they have all the wind turbines at the base of the mountains. It's a real desert climate. It's really hot in the summer, really cold in the winter. Not really fertile. And
real quick, how different was the Chilean Spanish versus Spanish versus Argentinian Spanish, because that's what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, so the Spanish changes a lot. Chile was real tough, and that's where I learned most of it, which is unfortunate. Spain's where Spanish I would have studied, but got there, and I had a real tough time. They have Basque country there, and very close by, and that was some really different Spanish, tough for me. Argentina seemed to go the smoothest, actually. I was at that point I was really proficient, so I got there, and I can already speak Spanish. And the accent, like I dealt with the accent a lot better in Argentina than I did in any other country.
So this is, for those who don't know, this is the Mendoza region, the Rioja, which is to the north. But we're mainly talking about Mendoza. There's what I consider four appellations: San Rafael to the south, where we used to make Balbi, and where the mum facility was for Aloe Domecq. And then we had the eastern region, which is where a lot of the wineries are. And then we've got the Central Valley, which is Luján, Agrello, Pedregal, etc., which is, even though we call it the Central Valley, it's the area to be in Vistalba. And then the Uco Valley, which is where we make our wine for Pedrusco and Chacras, which actually I didn't show any photos of Luke coming with us to the south of Chile, but he came and looked at our vineyard down in the south, and we certainly had a day up here in the Uco Valley in Altamira with Luke. So you can see he was worked with Catana. Of course, I worked at Chandon for many years with Terrasses, and today I'm obviously working with a number of other wineries down there. So what happened when you arrived, Luke? You went straight from a rugged environment in Spain to
Argentina.
Argentina, yeah.
Spain was interesting. It got cut a little bit short as well. Like the vintage wasn't too long, and I ended up going to camp in the mountains in Spain a little bit. And I think at this point, the last year I wasn't necessarily planning beforehand. I was really planning, the first four vintages, but the last two, Spain and Argentina, were kind of something I planned maybe 1 year prior. So my mentality was starting to change at this point from, necessarily just learning the practices to kind of trying to figure out what kind of wine I want to make, how do I make wine, sort of thing. And I've been real fortunate with the teams that I've been put on in all these wineries. So when I arrived in Argentina, the girl here, I actually worked with her when I was in Chile. Like, we know each other from living together in Chile. And so she's same age as me, making wine. So I was able to go out with her and help her pick and crush for her first project, which was really cool. I hope that, maybe someone can help me out with that this year. But getting to Argentina was definitely refreshing. Like I said in the beginning, it was the first time I got to a country and I didn't feel any kind of nerves. It wasn't any kind of discomfort. I just kind of got there, and I've already been speaking Spanish because I was in Spain. Just kind of got to Argentina and rolled real quickly with it.
And this is the project that we work on, and we took Luke up there, and this was the first time I'd seen him drinking. What is the crazy drink yet you were drinking, Luke?
You drink mate. You drink mate when you're in Argentina.
Yeah. And this is Luke helping us with the blend of Chacras. So the next vintage of Chacras will be the first time that Luke participated in one of our own wines, and this is him up in the Chacras vineyard in Altamira.
Yeah, cool. It's a pretty good photo. The wineries, honestly, I think I said before, the architecture, the design really affects the way that you make wines on the inside. And some of these have been incredible architecture. I think I had a photo of Opus, I had a photo of Errazuriz and this place. But, some of these others are just, all of them are incredible architecture. They're put together really well.
Well, Campo Viejo's architecture is stunning. And,
yeah, Campo Viejo is really interesting as well. Yeah, built into the hill.
Penfolds maybe not so much.
Yeah, Penfolds. That's right. The old winery is the old.
Yeah.
The McGill.
So where were you? You worked in a special place in the winery.
Yeah, so I was in the experimental area again, kind of like I was in Spain, but this was a bigger experimental area compared to there. So this photo on the left is basically where I worked. We have these macro bins, probably up to 30 macro bins that we're fermenting. All of these barriques, these big barrels, are on rolls. So we fill them up and then spin them during their fermentations. And then you can see stainless steel eggs, tanks, and behind that there's concrete eggs. back there.
Concrete eggs are right there. Yeah.
Yeah, we did lots of barrel fermentations, lots of concrete fermentation. Everything's basically micro fermented. So it was, I mean, like 200 ferments that I'm dealing with. That they're all real small. So it was actually really cool, and a really funny team there as well. Like I said, I've been very fortunate with the teams. Oh, also, yeah, you see the spheres. We had spheres, which is something I've never seen before. You know, you have eggs because you have convection in the ferment that causes heat. So they basically like stir themselves. But with a sphere, I assume it must do the same thing. We got them kind of late in the season, so we only had 2 ferments to go through them. But so I don't know too much yet on them. But they look really aesthetic. They look really
They look cool. Yeah. We use them in Canada. We use a lot of them in Canada, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There was actually a lot to this small winery. It was a very small operation, but a lot going on. It was cool to like do everything. I was assigned pretty much everything.
Well, Catana has this nice little Opus barrel room too, right?
Yeah, a lot of these places have a lot of similarities. Again with the architecture, but yeah, unfortunately I had to leave a little bit sooner than I wanted to. It was I was planning on doing a little bit of travel afterwards, but it kind of got to the point with the virus going on that all of the other internationals had left. I was the last one, and it got to the point where I either left or I didn't have the option to leave, and I decided to stay. And there were no flights out of Argentina for 4 weeks. 4 weeks I couldn't leave. And the vintage started to wind down. I knew that there was a potentiality that I got stuck there, but it winded down. And my boss actually sent me a photo from Twitter, and it was an emergency flight direct to the U.S. and it was happening like that week. So I kind of just jumped at it because I knew that, you know, if I stayed any longer, there wouldn't be any more work, and I didn't have the opportunity to travel. I was going to have to quarantine when I got here anyway. So I ended up having to talk to the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Argentina, to be able to get a 13-hour car ride to Buenos Aires for the flight. And, you know, every day it's real strict there. So you can't even be in the streets. There's police everywhere. Going just from work to my house, I was getting stopped by police twice. And it's not really easy when you're foreign, because during something like this, everyone is suspicious of the foreigners. So they just ask me 100 questions. They'd be like, oh, what are you doing here? How long have you been here? How'd you learn Spanish? Like, where are you going? Like, are you what? Like, just ridiculous, not ridiculous questions, but over asked me questions because I had an accent.
So you had everything, you know, you had the pandemic in Argentina, you had the drought in Australia, you had the fires in Opus. What am I missing? The Yellow Jackets in France. So yeah, a wild 3 years, man.
The world continues to spin, you know. It doesn't really change when you get somewhere.
So you want to tell us what you're going to do next?
I'm not. So I guess towards the end of that was I've learned a lot of the practices, a lot of the new different techniques that people use. The people actually use these techniques that I didn't know they'd used. I thought we just studied them and we didn't use them, but some people use some of these techniques. So it'll be interesting in the future for me to look at vineyards and wineries and the way that I might want to ferment specifically. But right now, I think it's time for me to spend a bit more time with a single vineyard over multiple years rather than just a vintage. When you go do a vintage, you just see practices. You don't see the vineyard so much. You don't see the way the grapes grow annually. And so this is what I'm hoping to do come this year. I've just gotten a job at a winery called Aperture Cellars, which is a small winery, but they make really interesting other varietals here in Sonoma County. They're really well known for Malbec, but it's run by a guy who went through the same program as myself, and he's still young. And so he's being creative. And to me, this is something that's really attractive. Like I want to learn how to make something with my own personality. And this is what this guy is doing. You know, he's really, and he's done well with it. So I'm excited to, you know, check something else out for the next vintage.
Cool.
I don't have any long-term plans. That's, yeah, I got a plan for like maybe half a year.
All right, so those are our contacts, and they can find you as well on
Yeah, Luke Goldschmidt _wine.
Luke. Okay, so just jumping onto a couple of see if anyone's got any relevant questions. I think, but a lot of hellos to you, Luke, and yeah. So
There's
really sorry.
There's a question here.
Oh. Having been around your dad and other winemakers your whole life, how do you avoid just duplicating what they develop and create your own style? Good question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's kind of like the epitome of that last year. It was like, you know, I've learned the practices, so how can I do this in a unique way? This is kind of what I said about Aperture Cellars. This is a guy that's doing stuff his way. With myself, I found after Spain, I got cut short, and I went to the mountains, and I ended up volunteering at a camp, and it was real separated. I had no service. It was all vegan, sugar-free, no alcohol, no caffeine. It was very strict.
No alcohol? What the heck?
I spent a month there, but it changes your perception a little bit. You're right. I cannot do the same thing as my dad does because he has an accent and he can get away with some of this sort of stuff. So I have to find my own style to be able to do this. And so I have a lot of ideas in my head, but it's just like when I can, put some of them into reality. Not duplicating. I'm not duplicating. I'm just, bending ideas.
Right. Okay. Well, it's been a great journey that you've had. It's going to be interesting to see if you can settle down in one place and not live with a backpack. You'll be able to have more clothes than just what you can carry, I guess. And
it is a different experience. I've come back home, and I remember I remember thinking like it's going to be weird to go back home, but I'm kind of fortunate in the way that I've come back home, and it does feel weird for me to be back home. But everyone in this country feels weird right now because they all got to stay in their houses. So it's like much easier for me to come home and feel comfortable because everyone is uncomfortable here.
Well, I hope with some nice wines that you can feel comfortable as well. Anyway. Yeah,
exactly. There's lots of always different stuff to learn.
Oh, a sheep joke. They want to know if you know a sheep joke, Luke.
I know a sheep joke.
That's okay. I can fill Seth in on a few others.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, really appreciate your time, Luke, and we enjoy having you home and discussing. I'm sure we're going to have a discussion over a few wines over the coming vintage, and we'll see what shakes out. But
yeah,
appreciate you guys all being on.
Yeah, there's a lot that I ran through there, but
yeah.
All of the experiences are unique in their own right. I could talk about probably each one for an hour in particular.
Well, maybe we should do that. We could choose one and we could do that in a couple of weeks. Anyway.
Maybe do a comparison of one of your wines with one of their wines somewhere.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you all being on, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys again next week. So as this sip continues to go on, we will continue to do this. Anyway, thanks very much for joining us, and thank you, Luke. Appreciate it. Salute with some Forefathers Cabernet, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.